It was almost 11 p.m. The man had just finished his work shift and was on his way home when suddenly the sky lit up in front of his eyes. Thousands of bright lights were traveling through the sky at lightning speed. They seemed to be coming from one central point. The man stared at the vision. He had heard about meteors but had never imagined he would ever bear witness to a shower of them hurtling towards his island home, Madagascar. When he arrived at his house, he woke his sleeping wife and told her what he had seen. His excitement about the incident was infectious, and his wife was soon wide awake listening to his story. She told him that he should tell his story to the authorities. Maybe the local news might want to interview him. It was about 3 days after the meteor shower when he was watching the local news. The anchor was talking about the discovery of the bodies of hundreds of wild animals. Their bodies had been shredded to pieces. The man was just wondering who or what could have done such a terrible thing when there was a knock at his door. He opened the door and saw two very official-looking men standing there. "Come in," he said. "You must be from the news station." The Foundation personnel looked at each other, then entered his home. "Welcome to SCP Exposed. Today we bring you the Keter-class subject, SCP-3994. But before I go on, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any more creepy SCP stories. SCP-3994 is the collective designation for a cluster of extraterrestrial entities, currently consisting of SCP-3994-A1 through SCP-3994-C27. Instances of the cluster have been grouped into categories A, B, or C, based upon the degree of their shell decay, with A having no signs of shell decay, B having any amount of shell decay but with a retained shell, and C lacking any shell at all. SCP-3994 develops and inhabits outer skins. These are referred to as shells that resemble human beings. It will favor mimicking the appearance of a pre-existing individual in its immediate vicinity if it lacks a shell. If no human is present, shell formation will occur regardless. These shells are assumed to act as disguises to hide the inner form of the alien, but often fail to perform it as intended. 68% of attempts by SCP-3994 to form humanoid shells have resulted in various deformities, including but not limited to twisted appendages, severe malformation resembling elephantitis, and disproportionate skeletal structure. All apparent bone malformations exist only in the skin of the shell. However, this percentage has shown to increase in the absence of a replicable human subject. The interior composition of SCP-3994 is of an unknown viscous substance. Without a shell, the bodies of the alien lack any confined form or structure, and may have a height upwards of 560 centimeters. In this state, it maneuvers by dragging itself across a surface using any number of its limbs, of which there could be any number. In the initial studies conducted by the Foundation, SCP-3994 demonstrated a great deal of difficulty in stringing together grammar and syntax, and displayed symptoms in line with those of speech and communication disorders, notably cluttering and apraxia of speech. However, it appears now that instances of SCP-3994 currently under Foundation custody have shown to be adapting rapidly to match the language proficiency of personnel. Countermeasures have been implemented to combat this. On the 9th of May, extensive countermeasures were implemented to prevent absolute blending of undiscovered instances of SCP-3994 into human societies. This included the following. All recreational activities relating to forms of media used to convey information, for example films and books, must have scrambled text or speech. No nonfiction media may be introduced to SCP-3994 under any circumstances. No information regarding the personal lives of personnel may be mentioned under any circumstances. The initial discovery of SCP-3994 occurred after news stations in Bolivia, Germany, and Madagascar reported dozens of wild animals having been shred to pieces with pulpy, viscous innards of a solid, uniform color. Since this initial discovery, no instances were found to have developed an inhuman shell. Likely due to rejection by inhuman mammalian societies, samples taken from deceased instances proved to be extraterrestrial, with no known relatives existing on Earth. Several days prior to the initial discovery, all three cities had experienced a minor meteor shower. Meteorites retrieved near recovering locations have tested positive for DNA samples of SCP-3994, implying that they have been utilizing meteorites as a method of travel from their location of origin. SCP-3994 is currently being held on-site at Site-92. The doors to its containment chambers must be pressurized as to prevent instances from maneuvering through gaps between the door and its frame. Instances are to be separated by category into their respective containment chambers, in groups of no more than 15 per chamber. Should the number of instances in any given category exceed 800, termination of up to 500 instances may be permitted. Termination of an instance of SCP-3994 requires 87% of its mass to be completely destroyed, whether by incineration of 800 degrees Celsius, dissolution by an acid of 1.1 pH or less, or a detonation of 415 megajoules of trinitrotoluene. Recategorization of instances should occur bi-monthly. Foundation web crawlers must consistently monitor upcoming meteor showers and databases of medical facilities in order to track uncontained instances of SCP-3994. Mobile Task Force Theta-991, consisting of human beings, is to be deployed wherever reports of SCP-3994 surface. And instances of the cluster must be apprehended under the guise of relocation to a private medical facility. It is to be provided a maximum of 3 times daily with Foundation-generated or heavily altered media. All media is to be centered around human activity and regarding as acceptable behavior for humans, regardless of the nature of the content. Incoming information from outside instances or sources must be immediately substituted with aforementioned media. All personnel who interact with any aspect of SCP-3994 or files regarding it must undergo a blood test prior to entering and exiting the containment chamber, as to prevent allowing the incorrect personnel from exiting. The Foundation discovered on one occasion that 3 of the total B category instances of cluster had progressed into a complete state of shell decay. They were then recognized as C category. Crevices in B category shells with protruding limbs, spines, and other appendages gave way to the full interior body of these SCP-3994 instances, effectively dissolving the shell. Testing suggests that shell decay is a natural process, with signs beginning 1 to 4 months after a shell is initially formed, and dissolving entirely within 1 year. The process of shell formation takes a maximum of 3 days. There is no way to inhibit this process. SCP-3994-A7 is an instance which was recovered from Ireland. It was recorded that initially it had been disregarded as an intoxicated townsperson until it was seen to have snapped its elbows back in half and kept going about its business. Once it was administered medical treatment, hospital staff discovered that it lacked any human bodily fluids, and the Foundation was subsequently involved. 3 days after its arrival at the Foundation, Dr. Kaufman conducted an interview with SCP-3994-A7. The following is a transcript from the interview. "Good morning, SCP-3994-A7, said Dr. Kaufman. "Morning, sick, sickening," replied the subject. "Do you find something sickening?" "It's an understandably standing rotten day." "What's making it rotten?" "No breakfast, and time for breakfast. Eating as a man must eat, you know." Are you hungry?" "Faye, hunger be hungry. And you, what was breakfast for yourself?" "I had waffles, I believe." "Waffles, I believe. Oh, I endear waffles, I believe. They are, how do you say, hungry for breakfast." "Do you know what a waffle is, A7? SCP-3994-A7 paused briefly. It gazed distinctly, then cleared its throat. The following lines from the subject contain several words of Argentinian Spanish, which have been translated into English. "A waffle, I believe, is a bread pastry often eaten with..." Unintelligible. "Syrup for breakfast. Humans. Us, we enjoy them. Popular here, in Argentina." A7, we are nowhere near Argentina. SCP-3994 does not require food and is presumed to be self-sustaining. A7's comments are theorized to have been the scrambled words of individuals in its location prior to recovery. Dr. Kaufman's interview with A7 has led to the discovery of telepathic communications existing between instances of SCP-3994. Further research is being conducted in order to understand the limits and capabilities of this. After further interviews were conducted with SCP-3994, it was confirmed it was able to develop language proficiency, cultural understanding, acceptable social behavior, and other essential components of human interaction, not only by interacting with humans directly, but also by communicating information between one another in a hive mind complex. Dampening this development by teaching it false information about humanity is necessary to uncover instances of SCP-3994 embedded in human society. Amnestics do not function as intended due to the composition of the alien. On the 12th of August, a security breach was attempted by a number of A, B, and C instances. C-27 provided aid to the breach by pressing itself between the crevices of the containment chamber door and the door frame to forcibly unhinge the door. They then functioned as a distraction by blocking off guards from accessing one side of the hallway leading to SCP-3994's containment chamber. Guards were unable to destroy enough of C-16 and C-27's mass in order to suppress them in the hallway. Remaining instances of SCP-3994 had formed shells resembling on-site staff and security prior to the incident. Both B-category instances were able to conceal any protruding appendages by wrapping them in shreds of cloth taken from each other's uniforms. The group of A-category instances acted in the roles of personnel escorting wounded researchers to the medical bay. The security breach lasted a total of 23 minutes before all violating instances of SCP-3994 were terminated via heavy artillery fire. On the 16th of September, a breach was attempted by 14 A-category instances, 37 B-category instances, and 6 C-category instances. Dr. Kaufman and 4 accompanying security guards approached SCP-3994's containment chamber, which caused the aforementioned instances to swarm around the door. It should be noted that this behavior is abnormal for the cluster. Dr. Kaufman opened the door and the 4 security guards were promptly trampled by the offending instances. However, all instances wove around Dr. Kaufman, who headed in the opposite direction from the group until he was subsequently apprehended 11 minutes after the breach. The instances managed to reach the center of Site-92 before all were successfully terminated via a contained flood of 20,000 gallons of battery-grade sulfuric acid. Immediately after the incident, the Foundation's director of Site-92 conducted an interview with Dr. Kaufman. This is the transcript. "What reason do you have for your actions today? You were seen walking away from a massive containment breach without alerting security," asked the site director. "I apologize. I must have forgotten," replied Dr. Kaufman. "Forgotten? Dr. Kaufman, you were being swarmed by SCP-3994. I don't want to punish you for initiation of and deliberate failure to contain a breach. Hell, I don't even want to blame you for what happened. You just opened the door. But they were all over you, Kaufman. They trampled the guards and headed straight for escape. And you forgot? Again, I apologize. I only did what I could." "Excuse me, Kaufman? You can't keep them here forever. They've taken the form of the dominant species on the planet, and they're damn near indestructible by our means of measurement. We haven't found them all. We don't know how many there are. You don't even know how they multiply." "We're not here to discuss SCP-3994, Kaufman. We're here to— You keep an army trapped inside these concrete walls, and it won't do a thing in your favor. They learn, and then they keep advancing. It's a simple concept. Buffers on their development will stop working. Sooner or later, there'll be enough instances on this godforsaken planet to teach them every language under the sun. They'll learn the games. They'll know that humans don't actually eat paste for breakfast or wear their shoes on their hands like you so desperately want them to believe. Soon enough, they'll be walking and talking like any other person, and at the rate they're going, they'll outsmart us 1,000,000 to 1. They just keep going and going and going. You've wagered a hefty bet against the universe's greatest conqueror, and it's a bet you're going to lose." Several hours following the interview, it was discovered that Dr. Kaufman had been on vacation for the past 2 weeks. What do you think of that SCP case? Please leave your comments below. The Special Forces unit of the SCP Foundation arrived at the scene. There had been reports of wildfires all across the country, and Foundation searchers had suspected these random wildfires were of the unnatural origin. There had also been eyewitness accounts of a man of fire who had been spotted wandering through these woods, setting fire to everything it touched. The Special Forces unit entered the wildfire with their protective gear, which prevented them from being burned. For many hours, they saw nothing but fire. They brought special equipment to douse the fire, and yet the fire kept springing up in random places without seemingly any cause. The Special Forces unit drove deeper into the woods. Then, one member spotted what appeared to be the silhouette of a man. The member called out to the man, inquiring if he needed any help, but the man did not reply. The man slowly turned to face them, but the member of the Special Forces unit realized the man was nothing but a silhouette. He had no face, no eyes, no mouth. His silhouette was formed purely by the outlines of the fire. The members stood still in shock, having not expected to encounter a being like this. The silhouette seemed to watch them for several seconds, and then, without warning, it pounced, surging forward and blasting the members with its heat. Hey guys, the SCP world just got a whole lot better. Paranormal Activity Books are releasing 3 new books, jam-packed with info on the most interesting SCPs. They feature hundreds of incredible professional illustrations created exclusively for this collection. Each book comes as a high-quality journal. It's a truly immersive SCP experience that you don't want to miss out on. Click on the link in the description, and together with your books, you will receive a free holographic patch, sticker pack, and SCP employee ID with a lanyard, a poster, a photo pack, a set of badges, and a secure access card with programmed NFC chip. My favorite part is the augmented reality book covers. Only Indiegogo backers will get those. To top it all off, there will be a massive giveaway of 30 vinyl toys based on SCP-035. So waste no time. Go to the link in the description, reserve your copy, and experience the world of SCP like never before. Welcome back to SCP Exposed. Today we bring you the Euclid and potentially Keter class object, SCP-457, also known as the Burning Man. This creature is currently under containment at Site-63. SCP-457 is kept in a 5mm by 5mm chamber with no less than 22.9 centimeters of fireproofing material upon all surfaces, and a blast-proof observation window with emergency blast shielding installed. The opening to the chamber consists of at least 2 temperature-controlled and airtight chambers that may be sealed in case of an emergency breach. SCP-457's chamber is kept at high humidity with a drainage system installed in the floor, as well as a misting sprinkler system installed and running constantly, and emergency hoses capable of at least 2.1 MPa of water pressure. The creature is allowed a small structure upon the wall of its chamber that remains water-free, but only allows for minimal protection and preservation of form. All personnel entering SCP-457's chamber should be wearing at least Class A temperature-controlled, flame-retardant sealed suits, and enter in groups of 3, with 2 members equipped with high-grade blast shields and emergency fire extinguishers. Personnel should only enter SCP-457's chamber in order to supply SCP-457 with its daily allotment of fuel material, or to examine and repair any damage to the chamber or sprinkler systems. Should SCP-457 engage personnel in a hostile manner, it is to be controlled via emergency extinguishers and hoses until it retreats back to its safe chamber. In the event that SCP-457 breaks containment, emergency sprinkler systems will be triggered, and personnel will be supplied with extinguishers and blast shielding. The creature's core form is as small as a single flame, comparable to a matchstick. In this state, SCP-457 does not make any sign of communication or sentience, apart from occasionally moving to burn a human's hand or to jump to a source of fuel in order to grow larger. When SCP-457 finds more fuel, it grows larger, and with this growth comes an increased growth in intelligence and sentience. Additionally, it will grow to produce an outline of a man's silhouette which is formed by its own flame. Once SCP-457 reaches an unknown threshold of size and fuel source, SCP-457 splits into 2 beings, and so on and so forth. However, multiple beings of SCP-457 are aggressive towards each other and will either attempt to consume or extinguish their doubles, especially if there is only a limited amount of fuel at hand. SCP-457's behavior is largely predictable, as its goals are simply to acquire larger sources of fuel and to spread. The danger of SCP-457 comes from its ability to increase intelligence with size, and apparent ability to learn and mimic behaviors. This has led to its purposely damaging and sabotaging sprinkler systems, and in rare circumstances, setting up relatively complex traps. It has also attempted to trick or reason with personnel to be released or have access to more fuel. although these attempts have all been a failure on the creature's part. An example of one of these complex traps is the incident that took place in March of 2019. SCP-457 managed to convince one of the personnel on site to enter its chamber after claiming it would reveal the secrets of the universe if the personnel entered its chamber. It is noted that this individual had just been moved to SCP-457's site and was also a newly appointed Level 2 member. Thus, he was a vulnerable candidate for the creature's manipulation. Once the individual entered the chamber, SCP-457 proceeded to lunge out and attempt to burn him. However, luckily for the individual, the creature had not been fed yet and was still very weak. Thus, he managed to escape with his life, although it could have turned out much differently if SCP-457 had already been fed. SCP-457 is able to communicate with Foundation personnel, either through letterings made by flames or scorch marks on the walls, or through verbal speech, although this is a rarity. When the creature was first captured and contained at Site-63, it proceeded to write out insults against humans on the walls of its chamber, such as,
"Humans will burn,"
and
"Fire succeeds all."
In the years of its containment at the Foundation, SCP-457 has only held one single conversation with Foundation personnel, which was a monumental discovery as previously it only spoke in short gasps and small sentences. The creature is able to produce verbal speech through high-pressure superheated air and the crackling and pops of flames. The following is an interview conducted between Dr. Arnold and SCP-457.
Can you speak currently?
Yes.
Good. Would you mind answering some questions? I'll take that as a no. How do you feel about being confined?
Dislike. No fuel. No air.
We've provided you with adequate air and fuel to survive.
Cannot burn. No fuel.
How do you feel?
Hungry.
Do you feel anything besides hunger? How do you feel about humans?
They burn.
How do you feel about fuel?
It burns.
Please move away from the window, or we will be forced to reduce your size considerably. How do you feel about water? Please move away from the window, or we will be forced to turn the sprinklers back on. Do you understand that? Stay away from the window and you will not be doused. Do you understand?
Want fuel. Want air. Want burn. Want to burn. Want to burn.
There isn't a way out. If you would please... What's it doing? Looking for a way out?
At this point in the interview, SCP-457 managed to severely damage much of the sprinkler system and destroy a portion of the fuel injector that had been sustaining its intelligent form, giving it free access to several gallons of gasoline. The interview transcript was recorded via security footage from before the blast. How SCP-457 managed to exploit the weakness of its chamber is unknown, and it has since been moved to a higher security chamber. SCP-457's origins are unknown. Some researchers theorize the creature is a former human being who was involved in some sort of accident or mishap that resulted in a change in its genetic code and a sort of merging with the closest element to it, presumably fire. Others theorize it is an evolved form of fire, perhaps triggered by a nuclear reaction of some sort. A few believe SCP-457 is an alien life form, whilst the more religious members believe it is a being from hell. Whatever the case, the Foundation has not made a sound conclusion as to exactly where SCP-457 came from. It appears to be destructive and violent, thus its containment is crucial in order to protect the outside world. As of now, Foundation personnel are working on a method to perhaps harness SCP-457's power source, although these experiments are still under work. So what did you think of that SCP case? Comment your thoughts below, and be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Don't forget to click the notification bell too so you don't miss out on any SCP stories. The Foundation personnel entered the wooden cabin. There were only 3 of them in total. It was a small mission, just a precautionary check of the reports of strange sightings in this area. Corporal Duncan was sure this was nothing to worry about. They all wanted to head home, and so they stepped into the cabin without much care. That was their biggest mistake. The creature appeared from the other room and killed Private McLeod, then moved forward with lightning-fast speed to kill off Private Langley. Corporal Duncan stood there in shock and managed to bring out his weapon to stop the creature from killing him too. Welcome back to SCP Exposed. Today we bring you Euclid Class Object SCP-3994. As of this day, the Foundation currently contains 6 instances of SCP-1399. The creature's appearance is best described as a mixture between a human, a blobfish, and a featherless chicken. They are typically hairless, stained with a thin layer of albumin-like excretion, and stand at an average of 2.9 meters. Its weight averages 780 kilograms for a matured instance. Autopsy has determined that the cervical vertebrae of a mature SCP-3199 instance is composed of cartilage rather than bone. This enables the neck and throat to twist and dislocate to around 340 degrees in either direction. The origin of SCP-3199 is unknown, although analysis of tissue shows traces of silky chicken, chimpanzee, stoat, mussel, adder, and human DNA. The creature's primary objective appears to be to spread its numbers. Instances of SCP-3199 are always found nearby hatchlings. These hatchlings appear as large eggs, although their exterior shells are much more durable than the typical egg material. An egg will pass through the creature's esophagus and eventually out via the mouth, followed by a viscous red substance. First thought to be a form of placenta, chemical breakdown has determined it to be a highly acidic material. SCP-3199 shows extreme distress throughout the process, with personnel describing the sound as not dissimilar to a scream. The creature will then remain within a 0.6 kilometer radius of its hatchlings, presumably to protect them. SCP-3199 has shown a violence whenever it comes into contact with human or animal life. It will proceed to kill any being with its large teeth and claws, and will decompose the remaining organs and bones with its acidic secretions. The remains will then be placed near a hatchling. Researchers theorize this is for ready consumption once the hatchling reaches maturity. SCP-3199 produces its eggs to fill unoccupied space. There is no known limit to the number of eggs the creature is capable of producing, and the standing theory is as follows. Given enough time, a single instance could single-handedly perform an LK-class species transmutation scenario. Attempts of communication with SCP-3199 have been made, but all attempts have been unsuccessful. The only response the creature appears to make are gurgles and squeaks that resemble wet pasta, although it is unlikely these are a direct response to personnel's questions. The termination of a live instance can be achieved through a variety of equally effective methods. SCP-3199 has proven to be around as resilient as a standard human subject. However, complete eradication has proven difficult for hatchlings due to the strength of their exterior shell. A single SCP-3199 egg can bear a tremendous amount of resilience, maintaining its form and purpose even following continual subjection to extreme, blunt force trauma, pressure exceeding 180,000 psi, high-pressure blades, serrated and non-serrated, and long-term acid exposure. The application of plastic explosives was considered but quickly rejected by higher administration. He is a primary component in the growth and development of SCP-3199's eggs, as discovered in an experiment conducted in March of 2019. An egg was relocated to a secure containment cell. Inside, temperature of the cell was gradually increased at an average rate of 7 degrees Celsius per minute. After approximately 9 minutes, the egg ruptured violently and produced a single hatchling. On-site personnel reacted swiftly to recontain the newborn instance. However, the excessive internal temperature appears to have impacted the physical maturity of the hatchling, and it reached adolescence at an accelerated rate of 40 seconds. The now adolescent hatchling produced 2 further instances of SCP-3199. Security response on site was swift, and all 3 instances were detained cleanly. This experiment could have easily resulted in a containment breach were it not for the quick reaction of on-site security. Therefore, any form of experiment pertaining to applying heat to SCP-3199 hatchlings has been forbidden by O5 level personnel. Another experiment was conducted with the hatchlings, except instead of heat, extremely low temperatures were administered upon the egg. The egg was submerged entirely in liquid nitrogen. Security remained on standby throughout the procedure, in light of prior experiments. After approximately 45 minutes of exposure, SCP-3199 had reached -190 degrees Celsius. Following 2 hours of exposure, the egg was removed and placed under a hydraulic press. The hydraulic press peaked at pressures of around 9,000 psi. Cracks appeared approximately 30 minutes into exposure before the egg shattered. Egg fragments were collected and, furthermore, pressed into a fine pulp. 0 traces of albumin or yolk were located. Complete incineration of the shell's remains proved successful in destroying the egg and its reproductive capabilities entirely. This method has proved successful in the destruction of SCP-3199 hatchlings. SCP-3199 was first discovered by the Foundation in Ireland following witness reports of a bald creature crying like a banshee from within an undisclosed area of woodland. These reports resulted in the dispatchment of Mobile Task Force Omega-19, who arrived on site with a total of 12 armed personnel. 2 personnel were lost in action, their internal organs and jaws having been almost entirely dissolved. During transportation, SCP-3199 produced 2 offspring, resulting in the deaths of a further 6 personnel. 1 week after the first recovery of the creature, a thorough sweep of SCP-3199's initial recovery location was enacted in an attempt to uncover the creature's origin and purpose. Local reports suggested that the small remote residence in question had been abandoned for at least 2 decades. Surface Team Delta 029E recovered several items of interest, including 1 bag of assorted thread and needles in various colors and sizes, approximately 13 chicken carcasses with visible human teeth marks lining the bare areas at random intervals, several containers including water bottles and Tupperware boxes holding an unidentified watery paste. The paste was a deep brown in color, and in the presence of oxygen, it turned hard. An A5 notebook heavily scratched with what was determined to be human fingernails. The words "New Breed Manifesto" are written on the front cover. The notebook itself consisted of 24 pages of standard lined paper, written in non-anomalous black ink. 19 of these pages consisted of various childlike illustrations vaguely resembling SCP-3199. On the remaining 5 pages, large lines of writing detailed the diary of an unnamed individual. Much of the written script was unreadable, although there was one section that was somewhat legible. It has been edited slightly for easier understanding. It reads as follows.
If you're reading this, then lucky you. 400,000 hours from now, and it'll be warm and wet and warm. And the wonderful versatility of inferior human DNA will give birth to a better era. A stronger era. One where food and water will be nothing but things of the past as we make and make and make more until... I don't really have much time. That's why I envy you so much. You'll have all the time you need. Time will be on, and death will be life. Life. New life needs things to live. New life will be a part of life from now on.
Final page consisted of the words "life" written repeatedly over and over again, as well as the words "want it." Additionally, the lyrics to English songwriter Frederick Weatherly's Danny Boy were written in Old Gaelic script. The identity of the journal's author is still unknown. SCP-3199's current containment procedure is as follows. All live instances of SCP-3199 are to be contained on Site-114 within a modified Keter humanoid container chamber, hereby referred to as primary containment, the walls of which should be contained in approximately 2 cm thick acid-resistant steel. Secondary containment consists of suspending all live instances of SCP-3199 within a block of solid transparent substance, currently clear acrylic resin. This block is to be at a height of at least 3 meters, with 1 armed security guard stationed immediately outside initial containment at all times. Secondary containment is to be regularly examined for damages. Movement and activities of any kind is to be noted. and the current Site-114 director is to be informed at the earliest possible convenience. Experiments involving the use of live SCP-3199 instances are strictly prohibited without approval from at least 2 personnel of Level 4 security clearance or above. In the event of a containment breach, the following procedure has been devised to limit collateral damage. On-site personnel with Level 1 security clearance or above assume standard lockdown procedure and evacuate Site-113 to await further instruction. Site-114 is to be flooded in its entirety by a clean, distilled water treated with dissolved Class A sedatives. Surface Team Tango 306A will be dispatched immediately to retrieve any lingering instances of the creature's eggs. Any living instances of SCP-3199 will be terminated on site, and their remaining eggs will be collected. All egg samples are to be transported to temporary off-site containment within a stable water bath. Site-114 will be subsequently drained, and custodian staff will be dispatched to thoroughly clean and sanitize the grounds to a Green Zone Foundation standard. Researchers have discovered that SCP-3199 appears sedated in liquid, as it seems to consider the water as occupied space. SCP-3199's primary objective is still uncertain. However, researchers are unsure as to whether the creature wishes to take over the world through its rapid reproduction cycle, or whether it merely exists to reproduce and spread its numbers. SCP-3199's violent behavior towards humans, however, confirms that under no circumstance may the creature be allowed to roam freely, as it poses a huge threat to innocent lives. Any reports of SCP-3199 outside of the Foundation's facilities must be investigated immediately and recovered. So, what did you think of that SCP case? Comment your thoughts below, and be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Don't forget to click the notification bell too, so you don't miss out on any SCP stories. It was a cold September morning in one of the most remote provinces in China. It had been an unusual summer season for the villagers. They were used to seeing many visitors during the summer months, and this year was no exception. People came from far and wide to trek through the forest adjoining the village. The forest was popular because of its abundance of rare flora and fauna, but this year, not everyone who entered the forest came out. There had been stories all summer of families reporting their relatives going missing. The local police force had sent out search parties, but none of the missing persons were ever found. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The villagers had their own theories about what had happened. Some people speculated that a mystical wolf was living in the forest and devouring them. Others were suspicious that it was actually the families that were to blame. That, in fact, perhaps the families had killed their relatives and buried them in the forest. Nobody knew for sure what had happened, as no bodies were ever found. The leader of the village knew that if the disappearances continued, then tourists would stop coming to visit the forest. He couldn't afford to let that happen. The local people relied on the money the tourists brought into the village. They wouldn't survive if no one came. He decided that he would take matters into his own hands. He would search the forest himself to find any clues. He wasn't concerned about entering the forest alone. He knew it like the back of his hand. He had spent most of his childhood playing in the depths of the forest, and he never got lost. He took the track that led to the very center. As he walked deeper and deeper into the forest, the trees got denser and it got darker and darker. Only a small chink of light could make its way through the denseness. Suddenly, he looked around him. It had only been about 3 months since he had last visited the forest, but things looked very different. There were a number of strange, sphere-shaped objects just over a meter tall dotted between the trees. He wondered what their purpose was. He approached the largest of the spheres. He could see that it was a hive-like structure with many chambers. He was just about to put his hand inside one of the chambers to find out what it was concealing, when he felt something crawling across his cheek towards his mouth. He reached up and grabbed hold of the insect, but at that moment, he felt a sharp pain on his finger, and he dropped the creature onto the floor. When he saw what it was, he relaxed. It was just a common garden earwig, nothing to be worried about. It must have given him a pinch with its abdominal forceps. But what the man didn't realize was that this was no common earwig. Welcome back to SCP Exposed. Before I go on, please make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any creepy SCP stories. Today we bring you Euclid Class Object SCP-439. SCP-439 is a small insect approximately 2.5 centimeters in length. It has a translucent grayish color and is very similar to the Forficula auricularia, otherwise known as the common earwig. The origins of this insect are currently unknown. The Foundation has only ever come across one specimen that was found in the middle of a dense forest in a remote province in mainland China. This creature is relatively harmless to human beings. Its huge abdominal forceps are capable of giving a painful pinch, but unless provoked, it is unlikely to attack. Its only danger to human life is in the way that it forms the habitat that it needs in order to be able to reproduce. First, the creature enters the human body through the mouth. In order to enter, the human being must be asleep. It is currently unknown how the creature determines that the human has fallen asleep. But what we do know is that the creature is accurate in knowing that the human is asleep in the majority of cases. Once the creature has located a suitable host, it waits in a dark corner of the room for the human to go to sleep. Once asleep, the creature approaches the human and enters the body through the mouth. SCP-439 travels along the trachea and takes up residence in one of the lungs. This occupancy of the body only occurs in humans. Other life forms have been offered to SCP-439 but have been rejected. Within less than 8 hours of the human awakening, the first symptoms will appear. Chest pains, difficulty in breathing are the first signs, closely followed by severe abdominal cramping. The tightness in the chest will become more severe and the host will break out in a fever. This will leave the host incapacitated. At this time is when the beginnings of fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, FOP, occur. FOP is normally a genetic disease that causes muscle tissue to turn into bone. The development of the new bone is so rapid, it causes severe pain in the human. Often, new bone spurs can be seen protruding from the skin. During this process, the human will seek out a dark, enclosed space to take refuge. Commonly, this is inside cabinets or heating ducts. If the host receives no treatment at all, it will only take within 3 days for him to reach the final stage of the transformation into what is known as the bone hive. When the host reaches this point, he will take up the fetal position. Sections of the skeletal structure will shift position until the body takes on a sphere-like shape. New bones will continue to form to produce a cage to protect the internal organs and colony. The end result will be around 3/4 of the size of the original human body. At this point, transformation is complete. The original queen that entered the host will have produced 20 to 30,000 offspring that function as workers, drones, and warriors in a typical insect hive hierarchy. Since only the queen is capable of reproduction, the rest of the hive's inhabitants are fortunately harmless except for the large, strong abdominal forceps of the warriors. The interior of the sphere is now almost unrecognizable from its original form. Some of the internal organs are used as food, whilst others are modified by the worker insects to be used as egg incubation chambers. The warrior insects collect organic material which is then processed by the host's digestive system into a nutritive slurry which feeds the colony and also maintains the hive structure. It takes around 4 to 6 months for a new queen to emerge. She will select a drone to mate with. Once this has happened, the colony will destroy itself by rupturing the sphere. The majority of the insects will die at this time as drones and workers cannot survive outside of the colony. Now that their task has been completed, the warrior insects will abandon the sphere. No food will be consumed by warriors that aren't nutritive slurry produced by the hive of origin. The new queen will venture out, fertilized, to search for her own new hive. Incredibly, the trauma of evacuation is not what finally causes biological activity to cease in the hive, but starvation is the cause. A particular disturbing piece of information was discovered when one of the leading female doctors in this field performed a range of experiments to see what damage had occurred to the body during the transformation. Previous autopsies had shown that some parts of the brain had been destroyed to be used for food, whilst other parts remained intact, presumably to control the bodily functions that were still required by the colony. During the doctor's study, she had the opportunity to examine a host structure shortly after its transformation. Although we know that the eyes are eventually used for food, because this particular structure had been found straight after its transformation, the eyes were still intact. The doctor lifted the eyelids and shone a beam of light into the eyes. The eyes moved and followed the beam as it went from left to right. At this point, the experiment was terminated, and there are no plans for any further testing. SCP-439 is currently being kept at the Hazardous Lifeforms Wing of Armed Research Site 45. The creature is kept in a sealed and locked 38-liter Type G containment unit. The unit is connected to an oxygen supply, and the creature is being fed through feeding tube 16A. The creature's diet consists solely of the approved nutritive substance XF. Handling is authorized only to personnel level 2 and higher. The Foundation's personnel have many theories as to why this creature exists. Some personnel feel that the insect's purpose is to take over the world, whilst others feel that it only seeks to prevent its own demise. Whatever the case, SCP-439 must be handled with great care. What do you think of that SCP case? Very disturbing, isn't it? Please comment below with your thoughts.